Today, we're looking into one of history's most enduring, unsolved mysteries, a case that still doesn't add up. In January 1959, 9 students from the Ural Polytechnical Institute set out into Russia's northern mountains, led by a 23-year-old engineering student named Igor Dyatlov. They were not amateurs chasing a thrill. This was one of the hardest winter routes their sports club had ever attempted. Rated Category 3, the highest difficulty grade the Soviet Hiking Federation gave out, and every one of them had trained for years to earn a place on it. A 10th hiker, Yuri turned back early after his knee gave out. He would spend the rest of his long life as the only member of that expedition who ever came home, and by his own account, never once felt lucky about it. The plan was simple on paper. Cross the pass, make camp on the far side of a mountain, the local Mansi people called Kolatsyakal, and send word back to their club within 3 weeks. The Mansi name for that mountain is usually translated a little differently depending who you ask, but every translation lands somewhere close to the same idea: Dead Mountain. The Mansi themselves avoided it for reasons that had nothing to do with superstition and everything to do with an old specific caution passed down through generations who hunted that terrain and knew exactly how unforgiving its weather could turn. On the evening of February 1st, the group made one small decision that mattered more than anyone realized at the time. Instead of dropping down to the shelter of the tree line, as their own route plan called for, they pitched their tent directly on the open slope of Kolatsyakal. We don't know exactly why. Deteriorating visibility, a wrong turn, a reluctance to lose the altitude they'd fought all day to gain. Investigators have offered all 3 explanations, and none of them are unreasonable. Experienced hikers make calls exactly like it, in weather exactly like that, all the time. It is, on its own, a forgettable detail. That night, something happened that experienced hikers do not do. They cut their way out of their own tent, not through the entrance a few feet away, but through the canvas wall itself, using knives from the inside. Then they ran, barefoot, in socks, in thin base layer clothing, into temperatures already sliding toward 40 below zero, away from the only shelter for miles, down a slope with no tree cover and, as far as any investigator has ever been able to determine, no other person's footprints anywhere near them. The search began 3 weeks later, when the group's promised message never arrived. It took searchers days just to find the tent, collapsed and slashed open, still holding warm boots, coats, food, everything a person needs to survive a night like that, left behind by people who, evidence suggests, left in something close to blind panic. It took much longer to find the hikers. The first 5 were scattered down the slope, in various states of undress, one found at the tree line with badly burned hands, as though he'd tried, uselessly, to build a fire or claw his way up into the branches. Investigators ruled these 5 deaths hypothermia, and the science behind that is real and well documented. As a dying body's core temperature crashes, blood vessels can suddenly dilate, flooding a person with a false, overwhelming sensation of heat. It's called paradoxical undressing, and it has been documented in hypothermia deaths for over a century. It does not, on its own, explain why 9 people cut their way out of a tent in the first place. It only explains what some of them did after. The remaining 4 bodies weren't found until spring, buried under meters of snow in a ravine below the campsite, and this is where the case stopped being explainable by cold alone. 2 had chest fractures with the force of a serious car crash and skull damage to match, but no external wounds, no bruising, no torn skin, nothing on the surface to suggest what had hit them that hard. One of the four was missing her tongue and eyes. Later lab tests found low-level radioactive contamination on some of the group's clothing. There were no other footprints in the snow, no sign anywhere of another human being. Over the following 6 decades, that gap between what the evidence showed and what anyone could prove caused it got filled by nearly every theory imaginable. Soviet investigators in 1959 briefly considered an attack by the local Mansi people and dropped it almost immediately. There was no evidence of a struggle, no unaccounted footprints, and no history of hostility to support it. A military cover-up theory followed the radiation findings. This was, after all, a closed Soviet military testing region, and some witnesses in nearby towns reported strange orange lights in the sky the same week the hikers died, lights that were never officially explained. A parachute mine or weapons test gone wrong would account for the radiation and the blunt force injuries both, though no test records have ever surfaced to confirm one happened that night. A Finnish researcher in the 2000s proposed infrasound, inaudible, low-frequency vibrations generated by wind moving across the mountain's specific shape, a phenomenon called a Kármán vortex street, capable of inducing sudden panic, nausea, and disorientation in people exposed to it without their ever consciously hearing a sound. And, inevitably, wilder explanations followed the case into popular culture. Yeti attacks, UFOs, versions of the story that made for good campfire telling but were never supported by a single piece of physical evidence at the scene. The official 1959 inquest, for its part, closed with a single, almost embarrassed line in the case file. The hikers had died as a result of a compelling unknown natural force. The files were sealed. For over 50 years, that sentence was the closest thing to an answer anyone had. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case, narrowing the field to natural explanations: an avalanche, a slab avalanche, or a severe windstorm. In 2021, a team of Swiss and Japanese researchers finally built a physical model that fit the evidence better than anything before it. Their theory: a rare, delayed slab avalanche caused by hours of wind-driven snow accumulating unevenly on the slope above the tent, worsened by the very cut the hikers had made into the hillside to pitch it. When that slab finally released, not as a dramatic wall of snow, but as a slower, heavier slide, it could crush ribs and fracture skulls with exactly the kind of blunt, internal force investigators found without leaving a mark on the skin, the same way a car's seatbelt can break ribs through skin that never tears. Panicked, injured, and in complete darkness, the theory goes, the group cut their way out of the one exit they could reach quickly and fled downhill toward the tree line, some of them already dying on the way there. It is, by most serious accounts today, the closest thing to a real answer this case is ever going to get. And even the scientists who built that theory are careful to say it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't fully explain the missing tongue and eyes, which some forensic experts attribute to small scavenging animals over the weeks before the bodies were found, though not everyone finds that fully satisfying either. It doesn't explain the radiation with total certainty. It doesn't explain, not really, why 9 people who knew exactly how to survive a Ural winter chose in one single night to run from the only shelter they had. Some questions, more than 60 years on, are simply going to stay open, filed still under the same tired phrase a Soviet investigator wrote in 1959, and nobody has meaningfully improved on since. A compelling, unknown force. Some mysteries never get a clean answer. And maybe That's exactly why we keep telling them. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe for more.